Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Rafe Mair and Damien Gillis' Water-Empowered Common Sense Canadian Tour. I'm Vicki Lightfoot, and I'm just going to host you. We used to have 3 levels of government in this province, and we saw some wonderful things happen when we had those 3 levels. Some wonderful things that helped us, and one of them was the creation of BC Hydro. We had the lowest rates in Canada, probably in North America. We owned it. It helped pay for our hospitals, it helped pay for our schools and other social programs. But that 4th level of government that we now have, special interests, have taken a lot away from us. Damien Gillis is a documentary filmmaker and produced many documentaries about BC's environment. As many of you know, Rafe was a social credit MLA for 6 years. During that time, he spent 1 year as the Minister of the Environment. And I have met people who have worked for the environment when Rafe was minister, and they said he was the best we ever had. And they were all quite sad when he left. After politics, Rafe worked as a broadcaster for 25 years for CKNW and for CJOR in Vancouver. He was rated the highest broadcaster in Canada at the time, and he won the Jack Webster's Foundation Bruce Hutchinson's Lifetime Achievement Award for Journalism.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all of you. I'm not here representing any political party. I'm here because I'm an old man. And I was thinking last night, when I started public speaking on political affairs, I was always the youngest person in the room. Then it got so that, well, I was probably maybe halfway. Now I find, look around the room, in my 82nd year, thinking I just could be the oldest person in the room. Time changes. I want to say something briefly about First Nations. This was a long learning curve for me. When I went to school in Vancouver, we were told all about the Indians in Ontario and Quebec. We learned about the Iroquois and the Huron and the Algonquin and all that sort of thing. Not a word about any of the nations that were in British Columbia. I say it's been a long learning curve because I've now come to understand and respect the positions taken by First Nations. For all the years that I've been following it and have been supportive, I've got a lot to make up for. We should thank God we have them still as stewards of our land and poking us into doing the right things. One of the problems that Damien and I have, we go around the province talking about these issues, because people won't believe them. They look at us and say, well, no government would be so dumb as to do that, surely. Well, I'm going to tell you, they are that dumb. Or perhaps it's not dumb at all. And I want to tell you, when we talk about the fiscal aspects of British Columbia today, Damien and I are not relying upon any thinking club or any Fraser Institute, that sort of thing. We deal with a well-known economist, independent, expert in government and business, Eric Anderson. So when I give you some facts, you're not getting them from any think tank. You're getting them from a man who has no axe to grind except to find the truth. The mainstream media, over the last 12 years now, I guess, 13 years maybe, have been appalling. I was in the media when the NDP were in. And man, did we kick the hell out of them. And justly so. We kicked them for doing some bloody stupid things. And we never let up. The moment the Liberals got in, that ended. There have been no more big op-ed features. No headline stories. No editorials at all critical of the Liberal Party. We've all had to do it on our own and had to find our own sources. Let's talk a little bit before we go too much further about these IPPs, Independent Power Projects. Damien and I went all around the province in 2009 talking about these things. And we told people that they weren't little mom and pop operations. Not at all. They were huge. They weren't little run-and-river things. And they weren't weirs. They were dams. And we told them they're going to bugger up the rivers without any question. Going to destroy the fishing. These things have all come true. But what people still have not grasped, and again is because it sounds like nobody would be that stupid, is that BC Hydro must buy this private power when it's tendered to them, or they must pay for it. And the paying for it is about 2 to 3 times more than the market price. About 10 times more than they can make it themselves. Now this has been a policy of the Campbell-Clark government. The result is that BC Hydro, were it in the private sector, would be bankrupt. There's no question about that at all. And the ranchers in the room would say, when it gets down to the nut cutting, we'll either pay this slush money ourselves of our taxes, or we'll have to sell BC Hydro, or both. Pipelines and tankers. I cannot believe that anybody can pay any attention to what the government or the companies are saying about this. Premier Clark is unsure about Enbridge. She's unsure about Kinder Morgan. But along comes the newspaper magnate, David Black, and so I want to put a refinery in Kitimat. She has no concern at all of how the bitumen is going to get there. It's the same line as the Enbridge, but she has no concern about this. And they should be concerned, and we all must be. Kalamazoo, Michigan. We're all old enough here, with the exception of Damien, to remember Kalamazoo by Glenn Miller. But Kalamazoo had a moderate spill in July 29th, I think it was, of the year 2010. The company said, I wouldn't want you to think that this is serious. And it was right by the highway. No problems with access. That mess has not been cleaned up yet, and it never will be cleaned up. We're not dealing here with the kind of oil that comes out of the tank that used to deliver to our houses. We're talking about bitumen, and it's tar. You notice that the companies want us to call it oil sands now. It's tar. It's dug out of the ground. It's blended with the condensate to make it go through the pipes a little easier. But the worst part of it is when it spills. After a few moments, it separates itself from the condensate and it sinks. And it sinks down to the bottom of the river. And it goes around in great big marbles, big balls of goo. They can't get it out. Well, this raises an interesting question. In light of Kalamazoo, what are we going to do when we have a spill in the Rocky Mountains? Or in the Rocky Mountain Trench? Or in the Coast Mountains? Or near here? Or in the Great Bear Rainforest? How are we going to get men, much less equipment, into those spills? How are we going to be able to do a damn thing about them? The answer is we can't. And to Enbridge and Kinder Morgan, that's just the cost of doing business. We're not talking here about risks. We're talking about lead pipe certainties. There is no doubt whatsoever we will have spills. Environment Canada has predicted spills in the ocean from tankers. Now I want to talk a little bit about the fiscal state of our province. I see by a newspaper item just shown me before I got up that Christy Clark has on the side of her car, or bus, debt-free British Columbia. Debt-free.
Joke of the day.
We owe $171 billion. Since the Liberals came to power, our per capita share of that debt has gone from a little over $5,000 to $40,000. Every man, woman, and child. Well, now you can see, yeah, but that's the old stuff. Who cares about that? And you never really have to pay that, do you? Well, ask the folks in Greece, or in Cyprus, or in Italy, or in Spain, or in Era. what happens when the day comes, the day of reckoning comes. And the day of reckoning is going to come with this. Now, I guess having been a politician and having watched politics all my life, I'm kind of used to a little bit of shading of the truth. But we're debt-free with $171 billion in debt. $40,000 for each of us in this room. That's debt-free. And I'd like to say this right now to the NDP. You're going to have to get off your ass. And you're going to have to counter this stuff. Because Premier Clark is having a field day. While the NDP gives out a fart a day with some kind of an announcement that doesn't mean very much, she's going on the same message. We're debt-free. We don't know how to run the economy. We have to make up our minds. Excuse me if I'm a little hoarse today. I've been having this little sort of horsey problem lately. We have to make up our minds. And we're going to have to make it up soon. Are we going to be run by large corporations hand in hand with our government? Or are we going to take back the decision making? Are we going to save our water? And that's the essential question. Are we going to save our lands, our air, our waterways? Or are these subjects just too difficult for the ordinary people to understand? Let us do it. We have now a situation in British Columbia that keeps me from shutting my mouth out. I can't do it. Not as an old man. I see the country literally in a watershed. I see the province at a point where if decisions and proper decisions are not made promptly, we're condemning our children and our grandchildren to eternal debt. And the kind of debt they're facing in Greece and Cyprus too. Not the kind that's just an article in a newspaper. The real kind. Now, I'm sometimes called a cynic. Well, I don't think so. I've been around the block a few times. And I know that when it's in their interest to do so, large corporations and governments lie through their teeth. Don't just shade meaning, they lie through their teeth. Black is white. It really is. It's 1984 in Animal Farm. This government has been doing it since 2001. This, as I say, could very well be our last chance. We have a BC Hydro literally bankrupt, a province that is close to it, and we have an environment that we're supposed to leave for our kids messed up permanently. This is the time we have to not only get out to vote, you've got to get your kids out to vote. I say this to young people whenever I talk to them. You'll go 500 miles to protest, but you won't walk across the street to vote. And we've got to do something about that. We're not telling them to get out and do that, because that's the only way we'll have change. So as I say, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we'd better make the best of our opportunity coming up now on May 14th, or rue it forever. Thank you for having me.
Could you clarify a little bit further of how that $171 billion is made up, that fiscal deficit plus where's the other stuff?
Well, governments going back a long, long way have loved to find ways to hide debt and make it look like it's not direct debt or it doesn't bother you. And in fairness, W.A.C. Bennett was a master of that, with contingent liabilities and so on. The $171 billion with a B is the aggregate of all of the money per capita that British Columbia owes. Just that, plain and simple. Now, I should have done this before. Deal very briefly with the deficit. And many people are confused by deficit and debt. When Christy Clark says we're not running a deficit, what she means is that if we need any money, we'll take out another mortgage, but we'll still put the numbers out there. And this is an apt illustration. If you and your household budget thought, oh my God, we're spending too much, next year it'll be different. We're going to have a balanced budget. And you found you couldn't make it, so you took out a second mortgage on your house. That's what the BC government's doing. That's plain and simply what it is. Now that also includes the money from BC Hydro. And I should have touched on that a little more. BC Hydro owes now somewhere around $60 billion to these private power producers, spread over a period of between 20 and 40 years, but still a matter of $2 or $3 billion every year. That's money that's just out of our pockets. Who do we think is going to pay that? The users. And who are the users? They're us in this room. That money has to come from somewhere, and this is where it's going to come from. So it's an aggregate of a number of other liabilities that the government has, its own direct liabilities, and the liabilities of BC Hydro, which is by far the largest individual one outside the government itself.
And that breaks down about 70 billion is conventional debt, 100 is half IPPs, 50-60 billion dollars, and the rest is these public-private partnership method of funding infrastructure. So all the Olympic infrastructure, the new bridges and highways all throughout the Lower Mainland, that's what's in that $100 billion mystery package. And this all comes straight from the Auditor General.
Talk about lying through your teeth. Campbell and Clark have both said that these triple P contracts are to save us from any exposure, any liability. In fact, that's exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. We're not going to go broke in the sense we can't pay our bills. We pay, if the companies go broke, too bad. This whole time of 13 years has been one lie, I use that word advisedly, but one falsehood, one lie after another. And we now have in this campaign an aggregation of them. Yes, ma'am.
Is it possible to break into the P3s that are happened already, or is it too late?
Well, this brings up an interesting question, and I've sort of talked about it this way. Supposing you had, and this is certainly not so in Mair, but supposing you had a corrupt mayor, a corrupt city council, and supposing all of the contracts were being let out to these guys' brother-in-law and pals and friends, etc., and a new mayor and council came in, going to sweep things clean, would you suggest that they should continue with these contracts to the other guy's brothers-in-law and so on? You'd say no. Those are unconscionable. They're not real contracts. They weren't made with proper bidding. And those guys, when they got into it, they knew what they were getting into. So I think that there is a case to be made for canceling something. And I'm particularly referring to the power ones.
We got to make these secret contracts public. You're paying for them. It's your money. How come we can't even see what we're paying for?
Not even the Auditor General. He couldn't get them.
No.
They're so secret. Now, you talked about alternative sources of energy, and there are lots of them. And we talked last night a little bit about wind power and tidal power and so on. And a number of these things are very helpful, but you've got to remember, they're not firm power. They're only there when the wind blows or when the tide's moving. And they also carry with them their own environmental concerns. But you can't base your power policy on wind power or something like that until God decides the wind will blow at 50 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, 365 a year. Even then you wouldn't do it.
I was just going to make a comment about other alternate sources of energy that don't have this problem with downside. And actually, it's natural gas. There's a technology out there. It's an Australian technology called Blue Gen fuel cells. It doesn't burn natural gas. It fractures it. A bar-sized unit will produce enough electricity to power 2 homes for a year, as well as producing 200 liters of water per day. This is an amazing technology.
Yeah.
You don't know? Have you heard about this?
No, I haven't.
Why I think this is probably a good idea? The Germans are buying into it big time.
I'm sure that there are all sorts of alternative ways to create power, and we'll learn more and more about them if we want to, and I think that's a good point you made. As long as we have those of the state in the present position in power, there isn't going to be any innovation. That's just life, I'm afraid. But that's a very good point.
One of the first things we need to stop doing is subsidizing fossil fuels. And all of these projects are us subsidizing oil and gas development. We learned that at the Rio Climate Summit last year, it was our government that blocked a motion brought forward by a number of nations that would have very likely passed or had a good chance to. That was a universal resolution to phase out the subsidies of fossil fuels and to redirect those funds toward supporting alternate clean technologies. And we just don't seem to be wanting to do any of that here in this country. Until we at least level the playing field and give alternate energy producers and new technologies at least a chance to compete on the same playing field. You know, they talk about government intervention all the time. These corporations, how we shouldn't be, government should stay the heck out of business, but they're one of the biggest people on the dole in terms of getting any taxpayer benefits. So
it's interesting to note too that back in 2009, on election night, Plutonic Power shares immediately skyrocketed. As soon as the Liberals are in and the NDP we're going to be in, the ones that do all of the IPPs, or a lot of the IPPs, their stock soared.
A good Canadian company, though.
Plutonic? Yeah. Well, it's kind of hard to say if it's Canadian or not. It is Canadian in one sense. For a long time, it was really controlled by General Electric.
Well, they were a partner, so the General Electric was the main capital for their projects. Interestingly enough, one of these projects, their big ones, in the Toba Inlet on the Sunshine Coast, just had a massive landslide, and it took out one of their two major projects there, over $10 million in damage, and it's on shutdown as a result. And also another development for that company, it was bought out, Plutonic was bought out by another company called Altera Power, and then General Electric bailed. I mean, they pretty much abandoned this industry. So even with the sweetheart deals we've given these companies, they really don't know what they're doing. We paid them 3-4 times the market rate for this power, and even with that, they're having a tough time making a go of it. So that gives you a sense of their level of competence. We put out a weekly news bulletin through email for the Common Sense Canadian talking about all these things. The library has computer access as well. So,
not to toot our own horn too much, but do take a look at the Canadian.org. We have a lot of writers, a lot of very good writers for it, and a lot of good information.
Our primary platform is through the web and email. These kinds of events it gives us a chance to go out into communities and talk to people face to face.
What is the significance of BC Hydro going bankrupt?
I guess the significance is really they'd be taken over by somebody in the private sector. I can't think of any other thing. We gotta have electricity, and I'm sure that's what's going to happen. Now that sounds to me that, you know, I feel sometimes that I'm being extravagant. But I look at BC Hydro and the amount of money it owes and the ability it has to make up that money, and it just is not there. And sooner or later, they're subject to the same economic rules that you and I are.
In addition to these IPP contracts, they've also taken on an extraordinary amount of capital spending of late, which does not correspond to an increase in productivity as it should. And that's another thing that Eric Anderson, our resident economist, has done a lot of work on. So they've taken on, I think it's up to $20 billion of capital debt for upgrades and things. And a lot of this is going to servicing this private power industry. So there's other ways that we subsidize it, like creating new power line hookups for them to plug into the grid. And so we're spending at a rate that just doesn't make sense. We're not getting value for money when it comes to BC Hydro. One of the things I'll just say about what the consequence is, we had for 50 years, thanks to the vision of W.A.C. Bennett, and even, you know, like you say, my family bore the very direct consequences of that planning, as did people throughout the Kootenays and the Peace Valley and other places. But it still understood that it was for the greater good. And one of the reasons Bennett, I understand, built that dam publicly is he looked at the financing cost, and with the government you can borrow money for next to nothing versus the private sector, and this is still true today. They're paying 10, 12, 13% interest rates. And so the cost of power goes up accordingly. There are only 4 public power jurisdictions left in North America: Tennessee Valley Hydro Authority, Manitoba, Quebec, and BC. And they, not coincidentally, all up until just a few years ago, for us, when we started going down this private path, are the 4 cheapest places for electricity in North America. There is a direct correlation between...
Surely everyone in this room knows the dilemma that we're in.
Right.
They should if they don't. Shouldn't the question more be what we're gonna do about it? We come from the same country you do,
Right.
sugar country. We had a farm there. The oil company approached our farm one day and said they're gonna drill sour gas well on our land. And we had no idea that about sour gas wells, we knew nothing about it. But suddenly they were there. The landman, a man from North Carolina, said, yeah, we're gonna drill a gas well in their land. And he spread out a map on our coffee table in the living room and explained where they were gonna drill it. And we said, what about our other land here? We had other quarters. And he said, well, yes, actually we want to drill one here and one here and one here as well. My wife and I asked, do we have any choice in this? And he said, oh no, but we'd just like you to be cooperative. So we know about this and the dilemmas that it causes. We know about Site C because we knew about the great land that they're going to flood and still intend to. Probably know about that too.
Sure.
I don't know that everybody does know these things so well, sir. Maybe everybody in this room doesn't, but Christy Clark is banking on the fact that people don't understand. And when you have something on the side of her bus that says debt-free British Columbia, she's expecting people to believe that. Now, we may be preaching to the converted here, but I think all we can do in our own little way is to continue doing that.
Believe me, I greatly appreciate what you gentlemen are doing. It's needed and necessary. But I just wish more people did already realize this, because if they don't, where have they been?
I want to just actually thank you, first of all, for sharing your personal story here. And I want to just provide a little bit of good news. And I think what Rafe and I are information people. That's our role. We both come from media, from totally different backgrounds. Myself a filmmaker, himself a broadcaster. We felt that lack of real coverage of these issues and engagement, the mainstream media is a big problem. These kinds of events gives us a chance to go out into communities and talk to people face to face. So that's where we chose to engage around these issues. However, that information does need to be translated into action, as you say. And I'll just illustrate one point where that's actually happened. The first stage of the environmental assessment process for Site C Dam just closed about 2 weeks ago. Had only the Enbridge project, I think in Canada, has had more public submissions, almost 99.9% opposed. Over 4,000 people took the time to write a letter and convey their concerns and put that on the record. And I think it really shows that people, even beyond the Peace Valley, are starting to understand these issues and paying attention to them and taking action. It's my sincere hope, as somebody who's partly rooted in that land, that people do start to understand that's a region that has provided a third of all our electricity and all of our natural gas, as you well know. A lot of our food, farmland products, a tremendous sacrifice for the betterment of the whole province, and we in the south here have very little appreciation of what kind of a burden that's been.
You're right, because apathy is the greatest enemy of knowledge and what you're trying to do. If you have to go through each community and explain this to people, it frightens them to begin with. By the time you get through, it just takes so long. Maybe we should just start with a plan that what are we going to do about it, rather than continuing to explain it. But of course, it has to be explained.
Well, my sense is there's very little knowledge about these issues, and so that's why we are partly still in the explaining phase. However, that has translated already into some major action. I don't think 2 years ago anybody had ever heard of Site C Dam outside of the Peace Valley, relatively speaking. I was at the Paddle for the Peace this year. There was a record 700 people that came from all over the province to paddle down that river and show their unified support for keeping that valley protected. And that really gives me a tremendous amount of hope. And we've seen with these meetings that Rafe and I have been involved in with the private power, all the big ones we stopped. The Butte Inlet, GE project, $5 billion project. The Kootenays, Glacier Hauser, 5 River project. The Pitt Meadows project in Vancouver, 5 major salmon rivers in the lower mainland. We showed up, we mobilized people, informed them. They came in thousands, in droves, and stood up and said, I don't care what your process is, you're not going to build this project. And we will be there in front of the bulldozer. When you have everyone from little kids to grandmothers standing up and saying that, it sends a very powerful message. And
You were talking about black, black, and you can't even write a letter to this newspaper in town here because he owns it. And you write a letter there, and if he doesn't like it, it doesn't get published.
He's one of the many, many people that have fired me over the last 45 years.
Jesus, I wonder why.
And by the way, I don't mind you stealing my lines, but leave my language alone.
I'm just following my role model here. I'm just learning a few things as I go.
My children are both very intelligent, they have good jobs, And they believe everything Christy Clark says. They don't believe what you're saying. Like I tell them stuff like that, and they think I'm nuts. Most people do believe, especially people that live down on the coast, don't believe that sort of thing. But
If they don't know,
It's
we're in
the now
trouble.
generation.
yeah, I know
They want
that's
it
what's
now.
happening.
They don't care that it's gonna ruin the land. They want the projects to go on because it's
Yeah.
jobs and it's money.
What you guys are saying, they don't believe. They believe what Christy Clark's saying, what the government's saying, what's on TV, what's in the newspaper. That's what most people believe. Very few people understand what you're saying. But one thing I want to know, I want to ask you, is information you're giving us right now, is that in your book?
My book?
Yes.
I have a book out right now, but it hasn't got a publisher yet.
Oh,
But
okay,
I think that
it's
one of the
out
best
there.
ones is Liquid Gold by Dr. John Calvert. And it's been out for some time now. But it's a virtual Bible for us, especially the power plants on rivers.
The one you've got.
No, that one, no, that isn't. Those are just sort of blogs of mine over the years. You know, it's not
So
direct.
very, very entertaining and informative political musings about this country in that book, Rafe Rants.
You were talking about earlier about the deals that we have with China and
Yes.
how we can stop them. How do we go about doing that?
You know, Rafe was instrumental in tubing the Meech Lake and Charlottetown Accords. The same idea, they had to be ratified in each province constitutionally. And so when BC voted no to that killed it. And what was the other province that?
Actually, Nova Scotia, Quebec, the three buried provinces of British Columbia.
In the end, there you go.
And it
So-
was a slam dunk as far as Mulroney was
Yeah.
concerned. Some slam dunk.
So with FEPA, there was a bill brought forward by the NDP on Monday. It did not pass because the federal Liberals did not vote against this bill. There are a number of conservatives. There's a tremendous amount of conservatives, and that's one thing I would say. Harper's vulnerable here, particularly among some of his grumbling backbenchers now. It is really splitting the conservative caucus. Generally speaking, there are a lot of small C traditional conservatives who are very uncomfortable about handing over control of Canadian strategic resources to the Chinese government of all people. So that's another thing I would do is if you, I'm not sure who your MP is in this riding. He's conservative. He's conservative. So I would target him. I would start writing letters to him and saying, because FEPA, the deal has been signed, but it hasn't been ratified in Parliament. And so this bill was brought forward by the NDP, was not to ratify it, to the opposite. And it failed because the Liberals didn't come along.
And there's some court challenges starting.
The other, yes, there's one other thing, and that actually is something really direct you can do. There's a First Nation on Vancouver Island, one lonely little First Nation called the Hupachesset. You can Google it and you'll find how you can support them. It's HUPACETH, something like that. And they're in court right now. They're fighting this for an injunction based on the fact that they were not consulted and accommodated under their constitutional rights. And they weren't. This thing has been very quiet. They need money for this case, $150,000 legal bill. See this through, they've raised all but $30,000 of it. Give them $20 or something, that would help ensure that that legal challenge runs its course. We were told that this was going to be ratified a long time ago, back in September. It's already been signed, it's just waiting that act of Parliament. There are a number of different possibilities as to why it's being held up, but I would say that conservative internal opposition is a key one. The First Nations is another one. There was also another action that we teamed up with Lead Now, which is a citizen engagement organization. There was an environmental assessment process for this thing. It was totally under the radar and managed to get 3,000 or 4,000 submissions into that, kind of at the last minute. And they're forced to some degree to take that seriously, to read through it, at least to spot some time. Those are a few things that you could do.
How do you impeach like we do in the States?
How do you
Yes.
impeach?
I don't know.
Unfortunately, we have no impeachment process. You can't unless you catch them stealing big time. Little time, they don't have to pay for that. No, there's nothing you can do except under the criminal law in Canada. This is a little off the subject, I guess, but in 2008 and 2009, a group of us put together a study on proportional representation. We gave the study to both the Premier at the time, Mr. Dosanjh, and to Campbell, who was the leader of the opposition. To his great credit, he said that he would implement it, which he did. And we had a referendum, you may remember. and it lost by 1.5 points, something like that. And for which I have constantly and loudly blamed the Green Party for. Because instead of embracing this, because it would bring sufficient change so they could improve the whole system, they were against that particular one, so therefore they were against it. It's too bad, because it's a whole different style of government, and you have MPs and MLAs accountable all of a sudden. And at present time, I'm getting a little weary. I think I'll just let you do this.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay, sure. Sorry. Well,
I've been a little under the weather, sorry.
all right. Well, you take one more question.
Okay, the question I have is anybody aware of what the channels are up into Kitimat from the Queen Charlotte down? They are extremely narrow. And there's only one small channel in the middle of it where the old river used to run through there that is navigable.
The Douglas Channel you're talking about?
Yeah, that's Douglas and the one that runs up into Kitimat.
Have you seen the little cartoon that Enbridge has done on that? What did you call it? Two bumps and a putting
Well,
green?
which are the Rocky Mountains and the Coast Range.
And no islands in the
They made
channel.
the islands disappear.
Now think about the inevitability of these accidents. Just think of how much money you would have bet that a ferry would have sunk. Yes, of course not. You see ferries? How would they sink? They've been doing this for years. How many would bet that a cruise ship would run aground right in broad daylight in Spain? Or another one would run out of all its fuel and everything and drift around to the oceans? As long as you've got humanity involved, you've got human error involved. And it's always going to be there. And we're going to have, that's why I've always said this is not if, but when.
These ships, just to tell you a little detail about the risk level here. These ships are largest in the world, very large crude carriers, aptly named, 350 meters long. Don't quote me within plus or minus 10. 350 meters long, about 150 meter beam, and they have to travel at speeds of approximately 19 knots just to maintain steering. And when they come around a corner, they have to actually speed up in order to maintain control of the vessel. Mariner's Law 101, when you're in a difficult or dangerous situation, you slow down, proceed with caution. And they're not even able to do that. It's as though people who have never even been to British Columbia, let alone the Douglas Channel or the waters of the Great Bear Rainforest, are planning this thing out. Because anybody that really knows it, including our First Nations friends up there who make a living fishing on that coast and know it like the back of their hand, think that this is just absolutely crazy.
I was born in Vancouver and lived most of my life in and around Vancouver. And this is an extremely dangerous situation, and to compare it to one or two chugging out in a day to something like 30 or 40 a day, 25 a day, whatever it may be, you're just begging for trouble. The problem with this is, too, that if the trouble did not have severe consequences, then you wouldn't mind. All right, so you got a little bit of leak and it's all picked up and go. But they aren't that way. They're huge consequences. And they're carrying this horrible bitumen. And you can't raft it like you can with ordinary oil. You just raft it in and scoop it out. You can't do it because it's gone down. And it makes Exxon Valdez look like child's play. That leads to a point that was made earlier, and I'll just try to comment on that very quickly. Under our system of government, backbench MPs and MLAs have no power whatsoever. It's utterly powerless. And they have to make something up so that they look like they're busy. We have a conservative, a guy named John Weston, and he appeared at a meeting much like this where I was speaking at a church in North Vancouver last fall. And I was onto this thing about the salmon habitat and so on being deleted, virtually deleted. And he got up, got a microphone, he said, I voted for that because it brings process. I said, John, you're a liar. You voted for it because it was in the budget, and you had to vote for it whether you wanted to or not, or you'd been out of the party. Number two, let me tell you a little bit about that process. Damon and I have been involved in the energy ones, the IPPs and so on, and he's got more stick to it than I have. I say now that I'd rather have a root canal without any anesthetic and go back to another one. I mean, it's a horrible thing. I go there and get up and say, Madam Chairman, and almost instantly I'm out of order because they know that I want to ask whether we want to do the deal in the first place, not how we do the deal. Do we want to do it? No, it's a done deal, that part. You're just there to help the company with the environmental stuff.
Do private landowners have any right to say that Kinder Morgan can't build a pipeline through their land?
I don't know for sure, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't expropriation legislation that would allow them to take it away.
Our case on our farm in the Peace River country, we only owned the surface right.
Yes.
But we had no control over anything below whatever 6 or 8 inches.
Well, most of this stuff is buried, as you well know. Particularly with fracking, I mean, you can drill one hole down, you can do up to 22, as I understand, at every 15 degrees or something. You can drill like a pizza, in a circle, and you can drill for up to, I've heard now, 5 kilometers in distance horizontally. So imagine the amount of land you can cover just from one access point.
Well, that whole question of mineral rights caused a hell of a fuss in Alberta back in the 30s and 40s when the Crown reserved unto itself the mines and minerals and petroleum products. And the people got madder than hell and said, well, we should have the whole land. And I don't recall the whole thing. I do know that I went to the Privy Council, and I think I'm right in saying that the people won that fight. But that's a big issue, whether you own just the surface rights or whether you own the surface. You have to look at your title, and I think most of the titles of BC allow you to have it. But
No one in BC owns a mineral right.
None of them do?
No one does.
I know when they were building, this has nothing to do with mines, they were building the Sea to Sky Railway. We thought they were going to go right through Lions Bay, and we had no comeback. They were just going to bulldoze us down and pay us fair market value for our place and so long and have fun. And however, they changed their minds and decided not to go that route with another one.
We gave them such a hard time that they didn't drill on our land either, but we were certainly ostracized by the entire community because people were making money from the oil and gas companies. A lot of them were given bonuses for allowing them to drill, and we were very unpopular, not only with the oil and gas companies, but with our neighbors for denying them entry on our land. But we stuck with it, and we're happy we did.
Well, good for you. I think no matter what the laws are, there's the issue of social license. And it is really, no matter how much brute force, you look at what the Harper government has done, they've talked about anybody that's raised questions about these pipelines are being criminalized. We're talking about radicals, First Nations and environmentalists, bringing all these laws, and yet I think they recognize that this is starting to backfire. It offends people's basic sense of decency. And as we saw with these private power projects, I think you'll see with the pipelines now, and you'll see with Site C, that no matter what the law says, they still need the social license. If you get enough people who are willing to stand up and put themselves on the line, it's pretty difficult for even the mightiest government in the land to push that thing through.
Sometimes it's kind of fun to be on the wrong end, and during the Charlottetown Accord, the Prime Minister called me a traitor, and John Crosby called me Canada's most dangerous man. I felt pretty good about that.
Talking about Site C, did you run into a woman called Gwen Johansson?
Oh, I know her well. She's a great lady.
You belong to her.
Yeah, there's Peace Valley Environment Association, the PVEA, and then she's now the mayor of Hudson's Hope, and they couldn't have a better person. Gwen is one of the most knowledgeable, wonderful people up there. Yeah. Absolutely. She's been leading the charge up there and really helped me with my documentary. And her friend Del Herbison, who's our neighbor, has taken me up flying all over to film these projects from the air. And really, that's one of the things that comes out of these unfortunate situations is you meet some lovely people in the Peace Valley in particular that are standing up. Some farming families. I don't know if you know the Bentley family. George Bentley, they called him Shotgun Bentley because when they came around to survey his property the first time for Site C, he stuck a shotgun in the surveyor's face. He said, "If you come back on my land again, I'm going to blow your head off." Well, I'm just quote. That's a quote. That's a direct quote. Now, I'm sorry. So I just want to be faithful to what he said. And he wouldn't leave until the water was up to his knees. 30 years later, that land is still there, and his granddaughter's now farming it, and her husband Ken are leading the way on protecting that property.
This leads, I might say, and I bring this up with hesitation, to the whole question of civil disobedience. And I don't think there's any question about it that British Columbia will rise up into civil disobedience if these lines go through, or if the tankers go through, that sort of thing. I've said before, and as long as I can stand up, which is difficult these days, I'll be in front of that first bulldozer myself.
And that's what it will take.
That's what it probably will take.
Yeah.
And that means that, the comfiness of this room and hopping out and having a beer and going to bed, that's all gone. You got to risk going to jail, like Betty Cratchit has done.
I agree.
Well, on that light note,
Maybe we'll
Well, hi, my name is Patrick. Rafe, welcome to the Inter-Cabinet Nation, for those who didn't know it. So I'm up from Lytton. Some of you guys probably know about our hydro project down there. However, I come up here today because I always have an open mind and I want to listen. I sit down here and it makes absolutely no sense to me, someone in Lytton, that we could do that stuff to our natural gas up here. And it seems to me it's almost like it's a rural and urban issue. The urban population want it at the expense of the rural community, and then to label people as radicals or Canada's most dangerous citizen. And yet, down here, it's almost like, I don't know what you would call them, gerbils?
Yeah.
Right? They just seem to have because what happens is they need the electricity. You know, they put the electricity down to the lower mainland. And what happens is, so when they went through my home reserves down here, they gave us $1, said this is good for you. Right? But they wouldn't give us electricity. In regards to the hydro project, you guys need to understand, we looked at it for 30 years. We came up here in 2000 and we held open houses here in 2000. We came back here in 2006 and again had open houses. We wanted to know whether or not our nation and our people, British Columbians, wanted a project like this. And having received no real no's, well, we thought, okay, well, we're not going to rely on apathy. You know what? In 2000, I wrote 21 pages of questions, comments, and concerns, and yet I was the one who signed the application for the project. I wanted to make sure people understood that the project's impacts needed to be known, right? And when that was, it wasn't about selling it. I'll tell you this much. The very first person who said no, we would have avoided. There's no way we wanted to put a 72-kilometer transmission line up to Logan Lake. It was BC Hydro that dictated that through the interconnection agreement. We wanted to tap into the 500 kilovolt line. They said, well, it was financially impossible. Baloney! That's my decision. It would have cost me an extra $23 million, but it was possible to do. They said no because BC Hydro made me permit that 72-kilometer line. Right? And what happens is, I went up and down that road and says, do you want it in your property? No? You want it in your property? Now when you see crossing Highway 8, who wanted it in their property? Shack Indian Band. Why? Because we're paying them. BC Hydro isn't paying them for that line that goes through their property. Highway 8 isn't paying them for that. What happens is, but we are. Right? Every person who's ever embraced this project, we negotiated a fair settlement for them so that they get annual resources, like annual payments and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, where's the electricity going? I don't know. Has Merritt experienced any brownout lately? Right? All the electricity we're generating is coming to Merritt for that new line they're developing from Mammoth Lake. It's an abandoned line, and they're twinning it down to Merritt so that Merritt can have the electricity. Because for some reason, and I just learned out today, they're shipping it all up to the Peace. But Merritt doesn't have enough electricity for its residents. So anyway, thanks you guys. I learned a lot, and I appreciate it. I'll just keep monitoring as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I love saying it in the lower mainland. If all we have to do is get process in order to do environmental things, for God's sake, let's log Stanley Park. There must be 4 or 5 years of good logging in there, and when it's all done, the high rises themselves will make us hundreds of billions of dollars, and people are shocked. We can't do that to Stanley Park. Why not? You're prepared to do it to other Stanley Parks all around the province.
I've listened to you for years.